Hello, everyone. My name is Jim Garvin. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer here at eTrepid, here to help guide you on your journey to compliance. I will provide my contact information at the end of the webinar in case you need to get a hold of me. I'd also like to take an opportunity to introduce Tom Blanford. Tom is the CEO of eTrepid. Tom has a unique career path that resulted in the establishment of the company and the image of his service. As a U.S. Navy veteran, Tom's military service and information technology background led him to create and become a premier award-winning global IT service provider. I'd like to take a moment to talk if you don't know anything about eTrepid, our team focuses on the areas of cybersecurity, cloud computing, AI and machine learning, as well as unified communication services such as voice over IP. eTrepid services are highly customizable and can be specifically developed to meet any business needs or compliance concerns. Our headquarters is located in Mechanicsville, Maryland, and we do have an office in Noida, India, staffed with all eTrepid employees. We're excited today to have John Lundgren from Breachbits for coffee and conversations with eTrepid today. Today's agenda, John joins us to discuss how attackers evaluate your organization as a target and the key cyber risk components they focus on. He will also review how purple teaming can be used to improve your cybersecurity, as well as the advantages and characteristics of an effective purple team. After the presentation, we will address the Q&A, plus give you an opportunity to take advantage of a free trial and assessment to help enhance your cybersecurity efforts. As we said, we're going to hold all questions until after the presentation to give John an opportunity to provide all the information he has for us today. Please feel free to use the Q&A features provided at the bottom of your screen and ask questions or comments in the chat session. We do have an eTrepid team monitoring these sections and will provide answers to the questions when we get to that portion of the conversation. We do have a number of people on today's virtual event and want to thank everyone for joining today. If you were one of the first 100 people to register for the event and remain on for the entire event, you will receive a $10 Starbucks gift card. Our team will follow up with you to ensure that you have information needed, and we'll be sure to get the gift card to you so you can enjoy a cup of coffee on us. So for now, we're happy to host your midday pick-me-up, so grab your coffee cup and let's get started. So again, we're delighted to have John Lundgren, who is the co-founder and CEO of Breachbits. John has industry experience developing malware detection capabilities in Microsoft Defender ATP and supporting botnet investigations in the Digital Crimes Unit during his period at Microsoft. John holds a Master's of Science in Cyber Systems and Operations from the Naval Postgraduate School, as well as certificates in cyber wargaming and cyber operations infrastructure. We would like to welcome John to the conversation. John, the floor is all yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Jim. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Let me share my screen here. Perfect. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. I appreciate it. Before I get started, I want to thank Jim and the whole eTrepid team for having me. We really appreciate working with this team. So it's great to have the opportunity to talk about something that I'm very passionate about, and our whole team at Breachbits is really passionate about, and that's purple teaming. What it is, why it works, and how to leverage it to improve your security. So we're going to start with some context first. We're going to review the perspectives and advantages that attackers have, and talk through the steps of the attack lifecycle that is used for pretty much every breach that you read about in the news. Next, we're going to talk about the goals and compositions of red and blue teams, what they are, what they do, and what good characteristics of each are. Next, we're going to talk about purple teaming. So we're going to combine those two disciplines and talk about what purple teaming is and what characteristics of effective purple teaming look like. And then we're going to walk through a purple team scenario just to kind of add some realism to the idea of purple teaming if it's a concept that's new to you. All right, so a little bit about my perspective. So I'm a Minnesota native from the beautiful state of Minnesota. So if you notice any accent or notice I just seem at ease with having a subpar football team, that's why. I spent about 15 years in the Navy as a cyber warfare officer. So during my time, I led cyber operations teams around the globe, and also had a chance to spend a lot of time doing research and development and leading research and development efforts into kind of next generation cyber capabilities within the DoD, and also in the intelligence community. So I have that, an appreciation for some of the environments that our defenders are working in. I also had a chance, like Jim said, to spend some time in the tech industry. So I worked at Microsoft developing machine learning models to detect malware and attacker tactics, techniques, and procedures for Microsoft Defender Advanced Threat Protection. And also had a chance to work as an investigator in Microsoft's Digital Crimes Unit, where we build cases against some of the world's largest botnets and malware operations to then work with law enforcement to take them down. So I have a kind of a bit of a holistic experience, seeing things both from a defender's and attacker's point of view, as well as understanding kind of what makes some of these criminal organizations and attackers tick. So I do love a good meme. I kept them light for this group. And presently, I am the co-founder and CEO of BreachBits. So at BreachBits, we provide automated and AI-powered red teaming services for companies, and we'll talk about red teaming here in a little bit in the presentation. And I'm also a cyber warfare officer in the Naval Reserves as well. So I'm going to start, like I said, with a little bit of context about some of the attackers that you or other defenders are up against in cyberspace. So first, I want to point out the wood paneling and great glasses there. I'd like to think that all attackers were lucky enough to operate in that type of environment, but I don't think that's the case. So, the first, I would say you would break down the threat groups that we face in cyberspace into three main groups. So the first are organized criminal actors. I put organized in quotations because some can be more organized than others. But the motivation here is financial. It's to get as much money as they can. So in order to do that, they focus on scale. So casting a wide net for potential victims and kind of crossing their fingers. Criminals can cash in a couple different ways for this threat group. First, I'd call it criminal to victim. So gaining access to your data and holding it at risk to extort money from you. So ransomware is a prime example there. And then another kind of line of business that I would say exists in this group is criminal to criminal. So breaking in, stealing data, and then selling that data to other criminals who can use it for identity theft. So because of how lucrative this is for these organizations, an entire underground support economy has really grown up over the years to support this, this market. So from malware and implant developers, so big groups of really smart computer scientists building the payloads that attackers are using for these threat groups to stay ahead of security products. Infrastructure rental. So there's a big part of this underground market that's focused on breaking into as many computers around the world as possible, and then renting access to those computers. It could be your home computer, your home network, but renting that access to other groups who would use it to either launch attacks or pilfer what they can from those compromised hosts. That's what we spent a lot of time focusing on these groups when I was doing investigations at Microsoft. One in particular, Neckers, that we investigated, which was the world's largest botnet at the time a few years ago before it was taken down. And this is exactly what they would do. They would cast a big net, try to compromise as many hosts as they could, and then rent access to those hosts to other threat groups to use it to conduct attacks, kind of like a malicious or illicit cloud computing. And then also attacker training and support. I had the opportunity to read some of the ransomware customer service guides that would be used on the dark web for to give guidance and support for these threat groups that are trying to extort money out of victims, and how to calm down the victims when they talk to them in chat panels or whatever to try to get to that close of getting that ransom. So these groups really operate like businesses. And so in business, you've heard the phrase time is money. So what these attackers are looking to do is to get in and get out as quickly as possible. When defenders slow them down too much, the return on investments kind of dwindles. And so that's an important thing to keep in mind as we think about how we protect ourselves against these groups. So the next group is nation state actors. So, really the motivation here is information. I guess there are a couple edge cases, particularly North Korea also use cybercrime to raise funds, as we've seen some past ransomware attacks. But for the most part, information is the motivation here. So the attacks are more targeted. So they'll target an organization because of what industry you're in or what your organization in particular may have access to. The first two, intelligence gathering and getting industry secrets. A lot of nation states out there really see this as a way of kind of, I would say, outsourcing their research and development. So it's an effective way to try to get a step ahead of their adversaries in cyberspace. And you see an example of it's the US F-35 and the Chinese J-31. That's just, an example of how these type of operations can really be a game changer for some of these nation states. And the third and less prevalent are activists. So, while still a consideration, just by sheer volume, most of the organizations that this group is a part of are really going to be facing those organized criminal actors and nation state actors. So I wanted to talk a bit about the attack lifecycle. I think that's important context before we talk about red teaming, blue teaming, and purple teaming. So this attack lifecycle is pretty standard for pretty much any breach that you've been a part of or that you've read about in the news. So really there are two ways to really find yourself coming into this attack lifecycle. The first is if you're targeted deliberately. So because your organization is a lucrative target either for information by nation state groups or for money for organized criminal groups, you could be targeted deliberately. The other way is you pose or you present a target of opportunity. So say a new vulnerability with an exploit becomes published on the dark web, and you just so happen to have a public facing host that has that vulnerability. You're presenting a target of opportunity to these attackers, and that's the second way that you can be brought into this attack lifecycle. So attackers will start with some initial reconnaissance, where they're really trying to build what your organization's attack surface looks like. So how many public-facing computers, cloud resources, or individuals, email addresses can be found online. And then from there, because most of these groups act like businesses or time is very valuable, so they're going to start with the low-hanging fruit, the easiest and most likely ways to be able to gain access to your environment, and kind of go through those attack vectors in that order. Next is initial compromise. So whether it's trying to brute force their way through a login page for a VPN, or using a vulnerability to break in, or doing campaigns of social engineering, they're going to try every trick that they can to get that initial compromise. And once they do, because of how much time it takes to get there, they're going to try to establish a foothold. So They're going to either create accounts or establish some means of persistence so that even if that computer turns off or the victim logs off, all of that time is not wasted and they can come back to your environment at their choosing. And really from there, depending on what the objective is for the attacker, usually they need to escalate privileges or elevate privileges to an administrator level account. And this gives them more freedom to move throughout the network, find other hosts, and really identify the place in your network they need to be to achieve their objective, whether that's getting access to as many hosts as possible to deploy a ransomware attack, or to find the targeted database or shared drive that holds the data they're looking for. This cycle here will continue until they establish the presence that lets them achieve that objective. So one last thing on context is just a note about the asymmetry of the fight that we're up in cyberspace. And this is not intended to scare or depress anyone, but really to highlight that the odds are stacked against the defenders. And so having a 100% success rate expectation or kind of a zero defect mentality is not helpful to any organization, and really just not healthy for the defenders that are in charge of keeping your organization secure. So some big advantages attackers have: a time advantage. So they choose the time and location of where they're going to attack, so they kind of have that over you. It's easy. For the most part, a lot of the tools that attackers use have been on the internet and publicly available for years, with lots of great YouTube videos and tutorials on how to use them. It's low cost, so in an age of cloud computing, it can be very cheap to create a cloud resource to be able to launch these attacks from. And because of just how lucrative cybercrime can be, there are just a lot of threat actors that are out there conducting these attacks in cyberspace. So like we say on the bottom, you're on the short end of an unfair fight. It's not to make you feel like all is lost, but we think culture plays a big role here in how you look at the threat and what you're up against in cyberspace. All right, so that's a little context about attackers, their motivations, the process and methodology they go through, and kind of I guess the asymmetry of what we're up against in cyberspace. So next I want to talk about a red team, a blue team, what they are, what their goals are, and then ultimately get to purple teaming. So what is a red team? A red team, we would say, is an individual or organization knowledgeable and proficient in the attacker tactics, techniques, and procedures, or TTPs. So they're responsible for using these TTPs to simulate attacks, just like an attacker would, against an IT environment, with the sole goal of trying to achieve the attacker's objective in order to test each layer of your security controls. These can be, a red team can be internal, it can be external, or a combination of the two. And some of the characteristics that we've seen of a good red team, if you're looking for a red team to bring into your organization, is one, they're up to date on current tactics, techniques, and procedures. These are always changing, and attackers, especially the ones that are motivated by money, they're really incentivized to keep up with the latest and greatest ways to break into your environment. So you need a red team that's really proficient in these and following the industry news so they know what the latest and greatest is. The second characteristic is not using the same individual that's responsible for fixing any of the controls that a red team may find weaknesses in. So we've seen this a lot where someone who is maybe a system administrator or a defender, puts a red team hat on in order to test their security. And while that can bring about positive results, the objective of being able to war game your defenses all of that is happening inside one person's head because they're going to be responsible for fixing it. And so really you want to ideally have someone that is outside of that defensive role and can look at it purely from an attacker's standpoint. And the last is a good red team focuses on objectives. So rather than being able to find every potential vulnerability that exists, really a good red team is focused on, what is the worst case scenario? What is the information that your organization holds most dear? And can I get access to that? So I'm sure many of you may have heard about penetration testing or pen testing. And while there are a lot of similarities between red teaming and pen testing, I just wanted to highlight some of the differences between the two, just for context. So red teaming is focused on objectives. Like I said, could an attacker, if they were brought into our environment, could they get elevated privileges and take over our domain? Or could they get access to our high value databases that hold our customer data, or our shared drive that holds all of our intellectual property, things like that? That's what a red team is focused on. Can they achieve that? A penetration test is focused on more of the breadth of testing your organization. So a good pen test will focus on, what does your entire attack surface look like? And where are all the doors and windows that an attacker could use to get in? So an analogy that we use is, think of your environment as a house that you're defending. If you want to test the security of that house, a penetration test would go around and kind of jiggle all the handles, try to open up the windows to see where the holes could be. While that's important, a red team would start that way, try to open up the doors, jiggle the handles, open the windows until they find a way to get in. And at that point, they'll maneuver through your house until they get to the safe, or the thing that you're really worried about protecting. So that's kind of the difference in mentality. So red teaming helps answer the question, so what, for each attack vector? Is it important, and not just kind of list all of them, and evaluates each layer of the controls in your environment. So not just how strong is your perimeter, but how well can you stop an attacker at each step of an attack if they do get in. So next, what is a blue team? So a blue team, we would say, is a team of IT or cybersecurity personnel responsible for architecting, deploying, monitoring, and defending a digital environment. So it can be comprised of, it can be purely internal with an internal IT and security team, and it can be external, or it could be a combination of the two. So we'll say some of the characteristics of good blue teams that we've seen are, one, they feel free to point out weaknesses. Some of the most challenging environments we've been in with customers or potential customers are working with blue teams or defenders that are really worried about pointing out some of the weaknesses that they find because they fear retribution, or that they'll get in trouble for maybe having that weakness in the first place. And as we said before, the odds are so stacked against you that having that zero defect mentality can really work against you. So the best blue teams that we've seen are, feel free from their leadership to really point out the weaknesses and really encourage identifying them and improving over time. Another characteristic we found of a good blue team is one that has an assume breach mentality. And what I mean by an assume breach mentality is a team that, while they focus on having a strong perimeter security to keep attackers out, are constantly asking themselves, okay, what if an attacker did get into this host or this part of the network? What could they do then? And really thinking through, assuming that attackers are getting at it, because they likely will, and then what happens next? And then lastly, a good blue team we found is one that has, a good diversity of skill sets. So there's so many areas to specialize in cybersecurity and IT that, not one or only a few individuals should be expected to have a knowledge of such a big industry and a big line of work. We've seen it over and over again where, a single IT person would be responsible for or expected to know absolutely everything when it comes to security. And it's just unrealistic to think that one person or a team of a couple people are going to be able to have that breadth and depth that they need to keep your organization secure. All right. So what is purple teaming? So purple teaming, it could be considered a noun where it's a group of a combination of blue team and red team members working together to strengthen your defenses, or more often than not, it's more of an activity, more of a verb. So, as we talked about before, the red team is focused on really stress testing your security in a way that an attacker would, to give you that adversarial view of just how well your defenses are working. And blue teams are on the other side trying to defend you and really slow down those attacks. So, purple teaming, by combining these two and iterating your way towards better cybersecurity, is what we found is the best approach to be able to really make big improvements in keeping your organization and your data secure. So it's focused on iteration. So having a red team come in, find where the holes are, then work with a blue team to fix them, and then start back over. Come back, we'll see if those flaws were fixed. If they were, great, then the red team tries to find another way in, and the cycle just kind of continues and iterates until, well, I guess I would say there's never a perfect end state because IT environments are constantly changing, but that iteration is the important part. And as I mentioned, it's not a single engagement or activity, it's a repeatable collaborative effort between the two teams. So the speed and number of iterations that you take when you're purple teaming between red team and blue team engagements, really that is some indication of how secure your organization is. How many times have you been able to go through that cycle before an attacker does to find the holes and fix them? As we like to say, purple teaming is really wargaming for your cybersecurity. In the military, we have so much experience in wargaming and being self-critical, and really it takes, you can't have that zero defect mentality that we talked about, because you're never going to get better unless you, test yourself, point out the flaws, and then try to fix them and just do it over and over again. So being in this industry for a while and participating in a lot of purple teaming exercises, we've been able to see some characteristics of what really effective purple teaming looks like. And for the most part, these come down to communication and culture. So the first is open and frequent communication between the red and blue teams. So, if it's important for the red and blue teams to have different focuses. So the red team focused just on attacking and blue team focusing just on defending. But after each kind of goes through an iteration of attack and defend, being able to sit down and have those two teams discuss what they're finding and what the impact is crucial. Without the blue team being able to understand what was going through the red team or attacker's mindset during these engagements, they can't really see where those red team actions are fitting into the overall attacker's way of thinking and plan. An effective purple team is going to focus on improvement and looking forward instead of finger pointing. So we've definitely been in some of these type of situations, and it can be uncomfortable when a blue team especially doesn't really have the freedom and feel like they're free to really point out these weaknesses in a way or an effort to get better. So we've seen, red teams come in to point out, some of the weaknesses that red team has found. Unfortunately, it happens where leadership just kind of focuses on, all right, we've heard it before. Who do we fire? Who's responsible for this? And really, that is just the wrong way of looking at this. Every time you identify a weakness, you really should be thinking be appreciative for finding those and think this is an opportunity for us to get better, instead of trying to figure out who is responsible and holding them accountable. Like I mentioned before, effective purple teaming should be comprised of separate teams or individuals for each purpose. So really the value that you get out of these purple teaming exercises is being able to sit down with leadership and blue teams and red teams, having a red team say, this is what we found, this is what we were able to do, and a blue team, either pushing back saying, listen, this doesn't get to any of our core resources, so it's a risk that we think is worth taking. Those conversations are really where the value comes for purple teaming. And you don't want those deliberations to be happening in someone's head that's responsible for both things. You want them open and clear and as a discussion among leadership and the people participating. And it's healthy to have constructive disagreements on risk levels, attack likelihood, et cetera. And those should be welcomed and encouraged. So there's been, some of the best purple teaming scenarios that I've been a part of are, can get kind of heated. An attack, a red teamer points out a weakness or flaw they were able to get around, and the blue team has very different ideas on just how risky that particular attack vector or compromise was. And those discussions and those disagreements are really healthy for the overall cybersecurity of that organization, because it gives leadership the opportunity to make really informed decisions, hearing both the attacker and the defender's standpoint. And at the end of the day, purple teaming is two teams, red teams and blue teams coming together for one objective, making you more secure. So if you're not familiar with purple teaming, it can seem a bit abstract at first. So I wanted to kind of run through a case study. And really, while the case study is in particular is fictional, it's comprised of situations and results that we've found time over time participating in these type of purple team engagements with customers. So for this scenario, we used the Bluth company. That's the company that we're going to be dealing with, a mid-sized real estate development firm. If any of you are familiar with the TV show Arrested Development, you may understand this reference. So the blue team for the Bluth company is comprised of a small internal IT and security team, but is augmented with an external managed security provider support. So a team that they've brought on to really help increase their capacity and capability when it comes to defending their data and their networks. And they bring in an external red team to test their controls and to kind of give that outsider perspective on just how secure they are. So remember, I mentioned that purple teaming is all about iterating your way to better security. So you'll see, we'll go through a couple iterations on what this looks like. So, when this engagement starts, the red team comes in, they look at the Bluth attack surface to try to find those attack vectors to get to their data, and they find dozens of vulnerabilities in the Bluth company's external attack surface. So of the dozens of vulnerabilities, only a couple have publicly available exploits that the red team can use to further their objectives. So the red team then leverages those vulnerabilities to gain access to what turns out to be an isolated web server. It does not enable access that they need to achieve their objective, which in this case we'll say is to gain access to a shared drive in the Bluth network that holds all of their development plans. So, think of that as their sensitive intellectual property they're trying to protect. So after the red team does this initial iteration, a blue team reviews the results, patches the 2 vulnerabilities that have exploits, but leaves the rest due to cost. So I want to point out a couple highlights here. So on the second bullet, you remember the penetration test versus red team discussion that we had earlier. So in this scenario, think of the difference between the 2 approaches. So a penetration test would highlight the number and location of the holes, which is important. But if your focus is securing, that intellectual property that Bluth has, really you want to get to which of these vulnerabilities or potential attack vectors could actually let an attacker get into my core network and let them achieve their objectives. So being able to focus on less on how many vulnerabilities they are and more on how many of these really pose an actual threat. That's really the difference between red teaming and purple teaming, and that's what kind of where the power in this approach comes from. And the last bullet, you'll see, so the blue team, they take a step back, they review the results. They had dozens of vulnerabilities that the red team found. But as we know, it's not just as simple as a quick software update for a lot of the networks that you're defending or you're operating. There can be really critical dependencies and maybe regulatory requirements why you can't just do a really rapid update cycle for some of these services or hosts that are on your network, and we understand that. But being able to have a red team come and say, sure, there are dozens of vulnerabilities, but these 2 are the ones that I can use to get access. What that lets you do as a defender is prioritize which of those vulnerabilities you need to focus on and really rank them in terms of risk to your organization. All right, so we have this initial iteration. The red team identifies, so after the initial round, the red team comes back, they identify a misconfiguration in the Bluth VPN, giving them access to Bluth's internal network. So the red team is then able to use that to elevate privileges, move laterally throughout the Bluth's network, and demonstrate it achieved access to its objective to Bluth's development plans. So at that point, the red and blue teams come together to identify the fix for the misconfiguration. They implement new controls and configuration changes to slow the internal movement that they saw the red team have once they were in their network. And then the cycle continues. So the red team comes back, they try to exploit the VPN again, but we're stopped this time because the blue team updates were effective. Then after exhausting the perimeter attack vectors unsuccessfully, the red team is able to gain access again to Bluth through a phishing attack. But then once they were in, the red team was stopped repeatedly from moving around the network due to the blue team's controls. But they do identify an additional tactic they didn't use the first time that allows them to get around one of the controls and move laterally. And then the cycle continues, like I said. The blue team and red team come back, figure out what that configuration change needs to be to stop that particular tactic, and figure out how that phishing attack was successful. And the cycle just continues. So you can see how the iteration of this approach can be so powerful in improving your security. So why this works? So both teams focused on the improvement of their security, not finding each other's mistakes and pointing fingers or placing blame. It's both teams, and especially the blue team, felt comfortable, shining some spotlight on, or some sunlight on some of the holes that were in their security so they could get better. Blue's leadership really encouraged this process of finding weakness without blame or punishment, so both teams were able to be completely honest. Open communication between the teams was important, so Blue could make informed business decisions on new controls or solutions. Like we mentioned, the red team didn't come in saying you have to fix all of these dozen vulnerabilities, just these are the two that allowed us to take a next step in our attacks. You should focus on them. And then iteration allowed the Blue team to confirm that the new controls were effective or where they can be improved. So if you have a single red team engagement, they come in, they find some holes, your team fixes them or they think they do, it's so important to be able to have that red team come back and try it again just to make sure that the controls that you put in place were effective. All right. So like we mentioned, sunlight and adversarial testing ultimately improved to better and improved security in this case. So just a quick review. So we talked about the perspectives attackers have and kind of the advantages they have over us in cyberspace. And then the steps of the attack lifecycle. So you can kind of understand the process the attackers are going through as they're trying to achieve their objectives in your organization. Then we talked about red and blue teams, what their goals are, their compositions and characteristics of effective red and blue teams. And then we talked about purple teaming, both the act, the action, and the combination, the group of the red and blue teams. And what characteristics of effective purple teaming are and how you can use it to improve your security. All right, so I'm going to end on this slide, just a couple references that may be helpful. The NIST Cybersecurity Framework is a good reference. Our co-founder, Foster Davis, took part in the Secretary of the Navy's Cybersecurity Readiness Review, where the Navy kind of took a step back and looked at the best in class for cybersecurity. What are the organizations that really have their act together? What are they doing? And they compiled a great report on, what are those characteristics of companies and organizations that are really doing this right. And then the MITRE ATT&CK framework, it's a great catalog of really all of the tactics and techniques that attackers have at their disposal. So you can get an appreciation for, really what you're up against, because it can seem overwhelming reading the news. It seems like there's a never-ending, one breach after another. So it's good to be able to step back and see what are all the tactics that are in an attacker's toolkit, so you can measure your cybersecurity against those tools. All right, so Jim, I am going to turn it back over to you for question and answers, if there are any.
Yes, and John, I want to thank you today again for joining us and providing the information and insight to everyone. A great perspective and a lot of good information, so thank you again. I do believe we have some questions in the queue, and at this time I'd like to invite Persephone. She's a member of our eTrepid team to talk about the questions submitted. Remember, if you still have questions, please use the Q&A feature provided at the bottom of the screen, and we'll try and answer them the best as possible. So Persephone, it's all yours.
Hi, Jim. Thank you for introducing me. I just wanted to go over a couple of your questions. Let's see here. Our first question we have is, since attackers are always changing and updating the ways they can break in, isn't it impossible to keep out all attackers, even using purple teaming?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and one we hear all the time. It can seem, like I said, it can seem like it's a never-ending battle against attackers, but really, if you ever heard the term, you don't have to be the fastest gazelle, you just have to be not the slowest, right? As long as you can outrun, other potential victims, right? That's the goal, not necessarily having a zero defect mentality. So you remember when I mentioned that a lot of these attackers are motivated by money, and as you use purple teaming to really iterate your way to better security, you're slowing those attackers' ability to move through their network and achieve their objective quickly. So, over time, as you put up more and more roadblocks, you're slowing them down and reducing their return on investment, essentially, from being able to get what they want out of your environment. So, doing this really helps slow them down to the point where, it really doesn't make financial sense to continue to go after you. They're going to go over, they're going to find an easier target. And really that's the best case that you can think of.
Okay, great. And the next one is, my company already has to meet compliance standards for security. Would you still recommend purple and red teaming for our security?
Yep, absolutely. So there are some great compliance standards that really highlight some really important security controls. But even if they look, some of those controls can look great on paper, but putting them all together into a cohesive and effective incident response or cybersecurity posture, that really needs to be tested in order for you to have confidence in it. So I would say just implementing your compliance controls, that's important, but you really want to test it to see how effective are they being.
All right, and our last question is, what are some of the common issues discovered when running a red teaming exercise?
Yeah, so I'll say, from a red teamer's perspective, some of the big challenges or shortfalls we would run into is, working with an organization that may not have a clear idea of what their worst case scenario is. So those objectives that an attacker is trying to get to really may not be clear. And really that's where you need to start, right? What is the worst case scenario for your organization? What data, if it were leaked, would be really detrimental? Where does that data live? And that should be your objective that you give the red teamer. Try to get access to this because these are the crown jewels we're protecting. That and having too limited a scope for a test is also kind of a shortfall that we've seen, where a company may have hundreds of public-facing hosts and they say we only want to test these few. Testing is good, but attackers don't have those same scope limitations. They're going to be able to test everything, and so you want to be able to test it in the same way an attacker is going to.
That was our last question.
There are a couple more that are showing up, Persephone. So Tony Landis, John, he asks, are you all aware of the kind of attack the recent Colonial Pipeline was? I'll let you take that one.
Sure. Yeah, no, great question, Tony. Yeah, we are familiar with the Colonial Pipeline attack. And really, when you think of the attack lifecycle, in order to have the impact that an attack like that had, those attackers, once they got initial access into the network, they had to do all the same things that we talked about in that attack lifecycle to really expand their network before they put down their ransomware payload. And so really that attack methodology really persists for this attack and all others.
Okay, and then I see another question here. If my company is using secure cloud services like MS or AWS, how confident can I be about cybersecurity? And should I still consider red team strategy in practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, there's really a shared security model for cloud resources. So the underlying cloud resources that AWS or Azure or Google provide, that is their responsibility to test, but all of the content and the applications and the data that you host on those, really they put the onus on securing that on you. So I absolutely think being able to test that, test the security of that is vital. So we have quite a few customers that are cloud only or cloud first in terms of infrastructure, and just because they have that cloud infrastructure, they're still presenting lots of different attack vectors to get to the data they're trying to keep secure.
And someone had a question. This sounds like just another thing that I need to spend my money on. I need to control my budget. Can this help?
Yeah, that's a good question, and one we hear a lot. So I would say, one thing that we've heard from lots of different organizations is, well, I guess not organizations, but security companies. Buy this and we'll keep you secure. Buy that and we'll keep you secure. But at the end of the day, a lot of companies aren't able to test to see how well are these working. So we've worked with a lot of organizations that, they've really put together a huge suite of security solutions. And when we come in and test them, we find, half of them aren't doing what they advertise that they need to be doing. So often those companies can kind of recoup some of that budget and get rid of the controls that really aren't effective in keeping us and real attackers out. So they can kind of prioritize what they're spending their limited resources on things that are really being effective in stopping us.
Okay, that was our last question.
Great. A lot of great questions. Thank you for the questions. Thank you, Persephone, also for coming in and managing the Q&A. And again, John, thank you so much again for joining us this year, to taking time to share the information. With all that, I'd like to take a moment to discuss the offer BreachBits and eTrepid has for you. So we've teamed up to get on the right track when it comes to your cybersecurity efforts. In the chat section, we've placed a link to sign up to take advantage of a 30-day free trial of BreachBits intelligent red teaming service, which will provide insight into your business risks and where you're most vulnerable. John, do you want to talk any more or have any other insight regarding the 30-day trial?
No, I think as we mentioned, having that initial inspection and attacker's point of view of your organization is, such a critical first step in seeing just how secure you are. So, like Jim mentioned, we're teaming up with the eTrepid team to kind of provide that initial assessment in a free pilot, and then work with eTrepid to identify, what are the things that they would recommend to help increase your security to keep you secure.
Great. Thanks for that, because that's the next piece of that. So eTrepid will provide that security assessment at the end of the 30-day free trial of BreachBits to help you review the results and provide options to be able to strengthen your security efforts. Again, the link is in the chat, so just simply fill out the form and we'll follow up to provide you additional information. You must sign up by June 1st to take advantage of that offer. This is my information, so feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about purple teaming. And then also, this is John's information. We'll be more than happy to address any questions you may have to provide any further information. In the meantime, you'll receive a survey for today's webinar. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are about the information you received today. And then lastly, be sure to join us for our next Coffee and Conversations topic, Risky Business, on Thursday, July 22nd at 11 a.m. We have TechRug CEO Justin Rymuth. He'll provide insight on ransomware, cybercrime, and business email compromises faced in 2021, as well as he'll explain how having the right cybersecurity and insurance has never been more important. So keep an eye out for that. More information will be for that event will be released very soon. Also, feel free to follow us on social media if you're interested in getting updated industry information, or join our news blast link. You can check us out on eTrepid.com, or certainly search for eTrepid on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, and Pinterest. Again, thank you for joining us. Have a great week, and we hope to see you again next time. Bye-bye.